This PC case has thrown the gauntlet to the ground, calling out a challenge to our top performing cases. And who is this upstart that's throwing hands? It's the Corsair 3500x. Now, did Corsair come out to play with this one, or is the 3500x just full of hot air? We're going to answer that question and more right here, right now on Robeytech. Corsair is no stranger to the PC case game, and we've seen a number of iconic cases from this juggernaut throughout the years. The Obsidian 1000D, the IQ 4000X, the 5000D, and oh man, does anyone remember like the Corsair Vengeance C70? It had like handles, it came in military green, and it felt like you were activating a weapon platform every time you powered it on. It'd be so cool with like the steel battalion control. Do you remember that one, Connor? Did you ever play steel? No, man, dude, that thing was rad. Okay, the point being here, Corsair knows how to make cases that leave an impression, but sometimes we've had to pay a premium price for those cases. So when we saw the 3500X at Computex, we had high hopes that Corsair would make this mid-tower case both performant and cost-conscious. Let's see how they did, starting with the price. At the time of this video, the Corsair 3500X is available in 3 different varieties. The 3500X for $89.99, the 3500X ARGB for $109.99, and the IQ Link 3500X RGB for $149.99. Each version comes in either black or white, and fortunately, they're the same price. This is a good start when it comes to pricing, but the 3500X does have some stiff competition from cases in this $90 to $150 price range. This is where cases like the Montech King 95, the Lian Li Langcool 216R, and the Asus TUF Gaming GT302 live. But back to the 3500X. The difference between these models comes down to what fans, if any, are included in the case. For the standard 3500X, it's a strict bring your own fans kind of party. For the 3500X ARGB, it comes equipped with 3 of Corsair's RS120 ARGB fans. These fans put an emphasis on style and static pressure. They also daisy chain together, which is nice, but it's not quite the cable diminishing IQ Link system. If you want that, you can make the jump to the IQ Link 3500X RGB version. This version comes with 3 of Corsair's new IQ Link RX120 fans, as well as an IQ Link system hub. If you were already planning to use IQ Link fans in an AIO, this is a really great way to kick off an IQ Link build, which is very easy to build with. Now, just a quick aside, for our review, we're looking at the 3500X ARGB. Just so there isn't any confusion, we're going to be referring to the 3500X ARGB as the 3500X for the rest of the video. Now, getting physical with it, the 3500X is a mid-tower case that compares in size to cases like the Phanteks NV5 or the new NZXT H7 Flow. The 3500X is slightly shorter than the H7 Flow and both shorter and wider than the NV5. Comparing these cases' weights, the 3500X is the lightest of the bunch at just over 23 pounds. Rounding out our tour of the outside, the 3500X has 2 USB Type-A ports, 1 USB Type-C port, and 1 combo audio jack, as well as power and reset buttons. It's not a bad amount of I/O. Moving to the inside of the case, the 3500X has a toolless entry. Just pop the top and side metal panels out, as well as the side and front tempered glass, and you're in. It's super easy, and on top of that, we've noticed that the case feels incredibly sturdy, even without the panels in place. Now that we're in, what actually fits inside? For motherboards, the 3500X supports mini ITX, micro ATX, and ATX motherboards, including back-connect motherboards like MSI Project Zero, Asus BTF, and Gigabyte Project Stealth. On top of that, because of how the motherboard tray is offset from the side fan mounts, it's also possible to mount an eATX motherboard with a width of up to 277 millimeters. You're likely going to have some funky overlap here, but if you need eATX support, it's there. Though, let's be clear, there are probably better cases for that. Now, moving on to GPUs, the 3500X supports GPUs up to 410 millimeters in length. This is the same support we saw in the NZXT H7 Flow, which you can check out a review of right here. In other words, the 3500X has room for bigger and beefier RTX 4090s and 7900 XTX GPUs. Now, moving on to fans and cooling, the 3500X can support 3 120mm or 2 140mm fans at the case side and the case top, and 1 120mm fan in the case rear. There are also mounts for 2 120mm fans on the top of the PSU shroud, which you can see right here, and either a 120mm or 140mm fan at the case bottom, right and front, which we didn't do here, but it goes there. However, if you're using a 360mm AIO or radiator at the case side, you might have to do some adjusting just to make sure that you can basically fit the fan down there at the bottom, but there's plenty of room here on the side. Speaking of AIOs and radiators, the 3500X has support for 360mm or 280mm radiators at the case side and top, as well as one 120mm radiator in the case rear. Just a quick note here, when mounting a radiator up top, we were really impressed by the way Corsair did the mounting rails. Rather than using a few larger rail cutouts, the 3500X had more rails that are shorter. It just made the top feel a whole lot sturdier, and then doing adjustments made it a whole lot easier. You just felt like you had more places to put in screws. Now, if you want to use an air cooler inside, the 3500X offers room for coolers with a max height of 170mm. This is fantastic news if you had your eyes set on Corsair's monstrously powerful CPU air cooler, the Corsair A115 or A115. Whichever way you say it. And if you want to see our review of that one, you could actually watch that right here. It's actually quite good. And if you haven't already, if you could just like and subscribe, that would be just as cool, if not cooler, than the A115 or A115. Moving on to storage space, Corsair is generous here, providing a mounting plate that can mount two 3.5-inch HDDs as well as two 2.5-inch SSDs. The plate sits behind the motherboard, so extra cabling isn't taking up room under the PSU shroud, which is great because there is not a lot of room to spare. But the best part of the tray is that it has nothing to do with the drives at all. It also has an indentation that is perfect for an IQ Link hub. Now, we just mentioned this not that long ago, but the 3500X has a very short PSU shroud, which limits builders to using a PSU with a max length of 180mm. While this does cut out options for the longer PSUs like Corsair's AX1600i or the ROG Thor, there's still enough room for like PSUs like the Corsair HXI, Asus's Tough Gaming Gold, Asus's, basically their Auras, or the Corsair RMS series. But this is actually where Corsair supports another thing that's awesome in their ecosystem, things like the Shift series of PSUs. With the cable connections on the side of the PSU instead of the front, being able to take them up and out of the shroud could be a huge benefit to builders. Okay, so final stop on the tour of the Corsair 3500X. Corsair has given us a unified front panel connector as well as USB 3, USB-C, and HD audio cables that match the color of the case. They're still taking us to the hot dog stand with basically ketchup and mustard HD audio wires, but we'll take the color matching where we can get it. Moving on to performance, we're going to slap some details for our test bench on the screen here as a quick reminder that all of our PC case tests are done using the same components every time in the same testing environment and with the same tests. Also, these tests are run at Intel stock CPU power settings, so no skullduggery here. Arr. While idling, the Corsair 3500X averaged 25 degrees Celsius on the CPU and 31 degrees on the GPU. These temperatures positioned it squarely between the two Fractal North XL models, putting it in 4th place in our idle testing. Moving on to full CPU load test, the 3500X had its sights set on beating both North XLs at this time. And with an average CPU temperature of 71 degrees, it was on the slightly cooler side of 71 than the North XL tempered glass. These temperatures landed the 3500X just 3 degrees shy of contending with our king of cool cases, the Asus GT302. And finally, in our 1440p gaming benchmarks, the Corsair 3500X stayed in the top 5 with CPU temperature averages of 42 degrees Celsius. This is a hotly contested landscape with competition from the NZXT H6 and new H7 Flow, as well as Antec C5 and the Asus GT302. So keeping this kind of company is really, really good news for the 3500X. Overall, the 3500X put up some really impressive numbers in our thermal tests, and at the time of this video, it is the strongest performing Corsair case that we have seen this year. So we've looked at benchmarks, we've examined the ins and outs, now it's time to answer the big question. What do we think about it, and do we recommend the Corsair 3500X? Overall, the 3500X is a very straightforward case to build in, especially if you opt for the IQ Link version, which honestly seems like the best version if you're going to do an IQ Link system. It really is a cost-effective way to do it, specifically using the 3500X IQ Link version of this case. There are tons of design choices that really make this case ideal for Corsair's unified device system, including the spot for the hub I mentioned earlier, cableways that accommodate the IQ Link cables well, and even a spot in the back to run connections outside of the case should IQ Link extend beyond that. But even without the IQ Link devices, the 3500X has an insane amount of space for cable management and some great places to really anchor cables into place. That said, there's very little space for extra cabling inside of the PSU shroud. This is easy to get around by using a PSU with malleable cables. In our build that we did on stream, we were able to use cable extensions thanks to an Asus Tough Gaming PSU. We could then bind up the cables super tight before even tying them down or tucking them into place. The only other thing we could kind of nitpick about the case was the lack of rubber grommets for the cable pass-throughs. I know, we harp on this with other cases too, so I kind of gotta call it out here. The pass-throughs here aren't terrible, but it would be nice to have something to block out any unsightly cables from being visible, especially if you were going to do an air cooler inside of this build instead of doing an AIO. These are just a few things to be aware of as you're choosing parts to go inside of the 3500X, but honestly, we have a lot of positive feelings about the 3500X. So yeah, we would definitely recommend it. Not only is it super performant, the build quality is good, and it has features that really make this a fun case to build inside of. And then there's the price, which I alluded to earlier, but I want to point this out in much more detail. The 3500X and 3500X ARGB are both competitive in their respective pricing fields, but the IQ Link version feels like the best bang for your buck from us, especially if you're already intending to use an IQ Link system. For $149.99, you get 3 of the IQ Link RX120 fans, as well as an IQ Link system hub. On their own, these would retail for $100. So essentially, with the IQ Link 3500X RGB, you're getting a bundle deal with case, fans, and hub for $40 cheaper than if you bought them separately, which means you now have $40 to spend on Starbucks, which our producer thinks is the greatest coffee in the world. Hashtag not sponsored. Hashtag also just kidding, she really doesn't believe that. At the end of the day, the Corsair 3500X feels like it's walking the pathway of iconic cases that have come before it, and we cannot wait to see what kind of builds that this case actually inspires. I mean, this one turned out pretty dang good. And with that, we're gonna wrap this one up. These are our thoughts on the Corsair 3500X ARGB, but we wanna know what you think. Do you like the mid-tower meets dual chamber design? If so, which version is the most appealing to you? And I'd love to know all that down in the comments below. Now, while you're down there, make sure you slap that subscribe button, whip that like button, and ring that notification bell so that you get a notification each and every time we post a video like this right here on Robeytech. Also, if you have questions about PC building or you want to talk more about this case, head on over to our Discord server, discord.gg/Robeytech. Amazing place to talk to other like-minded PC and tech enthusiasts who would love to be your best friend and help you build the PC of your dreams. Also, make sure you follow us at Robeytech absolutely everywhere. Thank you so much for watching this video, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.